So it's shortly after our start time. I was only going to have one participant today, but they might be busy. So, I think I'm just going to go ahead and start. So I'm going to quickly share my screen with you. If I can. Okay. So you should kind of have a full screen of this. Hopefully that is indeed happening. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today in this presentation. Today we're going to talk about anchoring bias and the brain. So let's just go ahead and start with an excerpt from Kortelling and Towitt's article on cognitive bias. Our cognitive abilities and rational functions have only recently started to develop. Evolution could not develop these new cognitive functions from scratch, but instead had to build this new and thin layer of human achievement from its ancient neural heritage for essential survival functions. As a result, they are less optimized for cognitive functions that have become essential for survival in our present modern civilization. Using this ancient biological intelligence for cognitive functions may therefore be compared to eating soup with a fork. This basic unifying construct of framework is the biological neural network. This network has association as its most fundamental and basic binding principle, together with some neural network characteristics that are intrinsically connected to associative information processing. This, of course, forms the basis for the tendency to retain given information that sometimes better could be ignored. A great example of this, of course, would be the anchoring bias. So, what is the anchoring bias? Sorry, I'm probably going to say this wrong. Spigen describes it. The anchoring effect is a type of cognitive bias that leads individuals to take unrelated information and consider it a reference point to form a judgment about unknown values. So our brains are not quite equipped for all the complex and quick decisions that are required of us daily in our modern time. Since our brains are still evolving to our current lifestyles, we must fill in the blanks, as it were, and this is where anchoring bias shows up for us. In the blank spaces of uncertainty. I like that line. It sounds really scary, right? The blank spaces of uncertainty. Well, it can be scary, but we seem to be blissfully unaware that anything is even going on, which is actually even more scary. When you think of anchoring, I think people really only consider it in a sales perspective, but anchoring can happen anywhere. Anchoring can affect whether or not you get a job, whether or not you have a romantic encounter, who you vote for, how much you pay for your next house or car, how much you can get somebody else to pay for your old house or car. The anchoring effect is visible in many areas, such as probability, general knowledge, estimations, negotiations, consumer choices, legal and willingness to pay decisions, and even legal judgments. Before we really investigate anchoring, we need to understand how we get and retain our memories. In her article on amnesia, Kristen Conger describes it as follows. We make and store memories by forging new neural pathways to the brain from things we take in through our 5 senses. The stimuli that our nerve cells detect, such as hearing, are called sensory memories. That sensory information flows along the nerve cells as an electrical impulse. As that impulse reaches the end of a nerve, it activates neurotransmitters or chemical messengers. Those neurotransmitters send the message across synapses and move it along the neurons. If we need to immediately use that sensory information, it moves to the short-term memory. Perception is key here though. Perception shapes what will be stored for the rest of the life of a human being. For example, the creation of an anchor price. Okay, so we have an anchor set. It now moves to your long-term memory, since we have decided that this information is relevant and important enough to need to be recalled later. The hippocampus sends the long-term memories to different areas of the cortex, depending on the type of memory. For instance, the amygdala houses intensely emotional memories. The memories are then stored in the synapses where they can be reactivated later. That was a quote from Conger again. What happens to people is that they tend to be influenced by information available in the environment and at the same time. After the decision is made, they cling strongly to defend this decision at any cost. There are a few studies that I looked into that I definitely want to share with you today. Some of these studies are going to show how anchors affect people's judgment of other people, what they're willing to pay for a particular product, and their ability to estimate the value of a product. So in this first study, we're looking at undergraduate business students and experienced realtors. So both of them were shown a house, given an information-rich package about all of its features, and then asked to appraise its value. The only difference in the information provided, to the groups was the list price. Some were anchored high, and of course others were anchored low. After making an appraisal, participants in each group were asked what factors influenced their decisions. The results? The estimates of both groups were significantly influenced by the anchored list price. The only notable difference was that the realtors, unlike the students, denied being influenced by the anchor. So it was the professionals versus the students in this particular case. So both were affected by the anchor, but the professionals were in complete denial. No other study I looked at had results quite like this. The fact that both groups favored their anchor was very, very normal. But the fact that the professionals were adamant that they were not duped, it's very, very interesting to me. Maybe it was pride getting in the way of recognizing maybe a good opportunity for growth. I do wonder then if the growth in a fixed mindset was a factor in this particular study. I didn't see anything in the research, but it just kept popping in the mind. It could have also been maybe just decision fatigue. So this is common problem with adults and adult students. We all have so much going on in everyone's lives. We all run out of mental stamina. So this could have made the anchor seem to make more sense to the professionals, even though they're meant to have known better. In decision making, the higher the ambiguity, the lower the familiarity or relevance, or perhaps personal involvement with the problem, the more trustworthy source or plausible bid estimate, the stronger the anchoring effects. A psychology teacher named Wiley Santos states in her video on cognitive biases that anchoring happens when an initial starting point has an undue influence on our judgment. If you get a number in your head, you will tend to not move far enough away from that number. Anchoring and adjustment work in a way that the anchors are accepted as a possible answer. Then the adjustment process starts to make it available or acceptable in terms of the target value. So why does this happen, you ask? Well, Santos says, because you think about that number first, you come up with cognitions for why that answer is around that number. And then you no longer realize how much influence that number ever had. Individuals mostly make insufficient adjustments when they form their judgments based on an initial value. The adjustment is not sufficient and it creates biased predictions, the estimations towards the anchor. Your brain will justify why you should trust the anchor and use that as your basis for adjustment. That's pretty darn sneaky, brain. This goes back to our ancient brains, trying to make sense of our new world. We know that the brain wants to fill in the blanks because it doesn't like uncertainty. In the ancient past, uncertainty meant that maybe we were somebody else's dinner. Uncertainty now still sparks fear, even though it's usually not life or death. Things that are different or unknown are scary. When we're asked things we don't know, we get stressed and we will do what we can to protect ourselves. This might mean guesswork mixed with a little bit of panic. I think this is why we are so easily swayed by an anchor. We're afraid. So I want to take a quick look at the physiology of stress in another slide. Because an open-ended problem sparks anxiety and stress, our brains do the best to construct stories that appear to account for the evident facts. In seeking to resolve the ambiguity, the brain will also fill in the missing details. The brain effectively counters its discomfort by projecting certainty. When an encounter is unexpected, it floods your system with stress hormones. Fight or flight is what kept us alive. Your amygdala signals the hypothalamus to fire up the hypothalamic pituitary axis. This is where the brain and the endocrine system intersect. Your adrenal glands release cortisol into the bloodstream and triggers a stress response. I have a lovely picture here. I want to show you another study done with students that had nothing to do with stress. This one deals with arbitrary numbers and anchoring. So the students in this experiment were asked to write down the last 2 digits of their social security number, and then they had to bid on a bottle of wine. The students with the highest last 2 digits bid the most for the wine. Their average was $37.55. And those with the lowest last 2 digits bid the least at $11.73 per bottle. So surprisingly, none of the students thought their social security numbers had influenced their bid. Anchoring can be used as a shortcut to predict an unknown value. It can help to estimate the target value by starting from a piece of information that is already known by the subject. So of course, in this last case, it was the numbers on your social insurance number. In the initial prices or number, when initial prices or a number are largely arbitrary, it can be influenced, I'm so sorry. The initial prices or number are largely arbitrary and can be influenced by random questions and answers. But once defined in the consumer's mind, these prices set up not only what the consumer is willing to pay for something, but also what this consumer is willing to pay for related products. It's not just about money. We can be anchored on a value that has nothing to do with the topic or issue or product. This also means that anchors can be used on things that do not involve money or value. In this next study, 2 groups of people were asked to judge the athleticism of a footballer based on a picture alone. Each group had the same picture, but the number on the jersey was different. The group with the higher jersey number scored the athlete better than the group with the lower jersey number. Now that's kind of interesting, right? Why would the player's number have any effect at all on whether, on judging whether the athlete was any good at their sport? This makes no sense, yet things like this happen all the time. Sometimes we have to make decisions based on instinct or gut feeling. In these situations, anchoring is high because it falls back into the unknown, filling the blanks again. Another part of the brain is activated. The anterior insula, which is part of the emotional wiring of the brain, involved in making us feel anxiety, pain, and even hunger. The anterior insula has what's known as spindle cells that are more commonly found in the digestive system. When you get a gut feeling, you might not be imagining. The spindle cells in your insula may be firing in sync with your churning stomach. In the sales perspective, anchoring is a 4-step cycle: presentation of the context, the anchor factor, attachment to decision, purchase repetition or repetition of the pattern. So presentation of the context. The consumer faces the information coming from the external environment, for example, categories shown for each product itself. The anchor factor. In this step of the process, anchoring itself is formed. Perceived external information will be fixed in the consumer's mind. Attachment to decision. After being created, the anchor price will be a standard in the consumer's decision. So, for example, the consumer will defend their choice at any cost. Purchase repetition, repetition of pattern. In this step, on which the consumer, already properly anchored, reflects the effect on a future purchase. So, for example, each time that this consumer is going to compare prices of a given good in which the anchor occurred, they unconsciously are going to use the price of the first acquisition. If a person or group of people are exposed to any information about a product pricing, they will be influenced based on this anchor price as a parameter to their buying decisions for that specific product. Now, I want you to imagine you are about to open your first restaurant, or the first of many. You have your location, you have your head chef, your menu set, you have all of your staff, decor, everything. Beautiful, right? All you need to do is to choose a name. In this study, 2 groups of people were given identical menus with no prices. The difference was that one menu said Studio 97 and the other said Studio 17. They were asked to write down how much they would be willing to pay for items on the menu. The group with Studio 97 on the menu said they would pay more for the same items than the group that had Studio 17 menus. Why does this happen? So they say that since the person is already thinking of a high number, 97, so they give a high value. They don't know they're doing it, but they definitely are. With an anchor, you can increase the amount of money people are willing to pay for the menu items. And nothing excites the brain more than money. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is activated when we are evaluating a financial decision. This region of the brain is what makes us self-aware, reflective beings and helps us solve complex problems. There are some ethical issues here. Is it morally right to make something more expensive just because you can? Not because it's a fair and true value of the product? Is anchoring a tool or a weapon? Um, what can we take away from these studies? Well, we can't deny that anchoring exists and that we are all influenced, often unknowingly, mostly unknowingly, by anchors. As teachers and facilitators, we can also influence our students by planting anchors. When we start a new topic, students may get stuck on things that they can't quite explain and have a hard time accepting new information that contradicts their anchored minds. Anchors can be used for financial gain, especially in a sales environment. One should contemplate the ethical factors when choosing to use an anchor or choosing to use the anchoring effect. Anchoring effect is one of the most robust cognitive biases, since it might occur without the individual's awareness, and eliminating it is quite difficult. I think that fact makes this kind of a very scary bias. We're being influenced, and we as consumers are absolutely blind to see it. The anchoring effect is influential, even when it's uninformative, according to several studies. We've actually talked about a study today, the students and the wine, absolutely uninformative, their anchor, and it still affected their decisions. Anchoring cannot be eliminated by pre-warnings. And again, that kind of makes this a scary bias. So what can we do? Are we all doomed to be influenced by the anchor effect forever? Are we powerless to do anything? Are we just sheep on a leash? Well, I certainly hope not. A choice nudge can make people think of more counteroffers, which, of course, in turn will reduce anchoring. This is because a key psychological mechanism underlining the anchoring effect is that the anchor dominates people's thoughts. The more options participants think of, the chances are that they will think of a wider range of options, thereby weakening the psychological predominance of the anchor. So we really can do something about it. It really, really will depend on our level of awareness in the moment. So is this effective against our bias? I think it can be effective. We have to make a serious effort to realize that we are easy to influence, and that might be a hard pill for some of us to swallow. Once this is accepted, it can make us more aware when anchoring is happening even in the first place. If we choose to have an open mind and make a conscious effort to explore more options when faced with the unknown, we can adjust enough away and counteract the anchoring effect. Now, I don't necessarily believe that this can work on absolutely everybody. If someone has a closed or a fixed mindset, I think this can be really challenging. It would be very difficult for this type of mindset to firstly acknowledge being duped by the anchor in the first place. But then secondly, try to explore more options outside of the known. One of the videos that I watched, the author was saying that if we can just continue to mind our behaviors, we can kind of really do anything. And I really like that. The more we are aware, the more we can change in ourselves. Well, anchoring is not all that bad. It can be used for good. According to the Harvard Law School's program on negotiation, in negotiations, the anchoring effect occurs often, but goal setting can affect the end result. In a review of goal setting research, negotiation scholars Deborah Zetek and Alice Stulemacher of DePaul University found that when negotiators set specific challenging goals, they consistently outperform those who set lower or vague goals. Perhaps not surprisingly, performance improves when negotiators are given rewards for reaching a goal. But even unrewarded goals, such as, I don't know, maybe we're going to run 5 miles today, will boost your performance. The anchoring effect provides an effective way to teach students about cognitive biases because it is simple to demonstrate, highly robust to instructor idiosyncrasy, and easy to adapt to different contexts and learning objectives. After noting everyone's susceptibility to cognitive biases, even if they are aware of them, students often find it most intriguing to engage in a discussion about the ethics of using anchoring as a bargaining tactic. I think it's also important to say that if you are going to teach a class about anchoring, is that you do spend some time debriefing. Even a slight dupe, like we've seen in some of these studies today that there's a little bit of deception in there. It's going to be important to talk to the students and let them know why we made that decision and why, because that building trust in a classroom is tricky. There are definitely ethical issues with this bias. Again, considering it does involve some sort of deception, it's really important that we discuss that with the group afterwards. As we discover more about biases in ourselves, it's important to reflect and talk about these biases. Reflection will help us adjust our own behaviors and become more aware when these anchors are happening. If we can give ourselves more choices, we can hopefully minimize the power that anchor has on us. So what's my takeaway? It seems that based on the research here and the studies we looked into, that this particular cognitive bias is very strong and also mostly invisible. It's kind of a ninja bias. It's difficult to see when you're being anchored in the moment, and we are all susceptible to the pull of an anchor. But there are ways around an anchor if we are aware and able to consider other options. There are ethical issues with anchoring and should be used with caution. This bias isn't inherently bad, but it can be used for gain to the detriment of others. It can also motivate, which is essential for any facilitator. And that is the end of my slides. I want to thank you for joining me. I don't have any participants to do a Q&A with, so I just wanted to thank you for your time. And watching this, I imagine afterwards. I don't know what I did to my screen here. Okay, well, thank you so much, and I will post this shortly. Have a great rest of the day. Oh, there I am. Thank you for joining me in this chaotic presentation.